One cold November morning, a little girl appeared at a small-town bakery. Quiet, alone, carrying a backpack almost bigger than her frail frame. Then, one morning, 4 black military SUVs pulled up right outside the bakery. Who were they looking for? And what secrets were hidden behind a place that seemed so ordinary? Welcome to NT, where everyday kindness becomes unforgettable. Let's begin this journey together. In the small town of Solvang, California, there was a place where the air always smelled of melting butter and freshly baked bread. The maple and thyme, no flashy sign, no loud advertising. Locals simply knew if you walked past that corner early in the morning, you would catch the warm, comforting scent of cinnamon rolls weaving through the morning mist. Behind the glass counter lined with golden croissants, warm apple pies, and spicy ginger cookies was Clara Benson, a 31-year-old woman with light brown hair, often hastily tied up in a checkered headscarf. She wore a simple white blouse and a navy blue apron, embroidered with a tiny sprig of thyme at the bottom, a small but unmistakable detail, like a quiet invitation to remember her face among the soft glow of the bakery. Clara wasn't the kind of person you noticed first in a crowd, nor the kind that made heads turn. But if you looked closely, her smile always carried something different. Gentle, genuine, and just a little bit sad. The kind of sadness that clings like a late autumn breeze, slipping through half-closed windows. She lived alone in a small apartment above the town's old pharmacy, where the golden lamplight spilled over worn wooden steps at night. Her parents had passed away when she was still young, and the only aunt who once cared for her had moved to Arizona years ago. Clara kept the faded, yellowed family photographs tucked carefully in a small wooden box beneath her bed, a silent testament to what once was. Day after day, her life followed a quiet rhythm. Unlock the bakery at dawn, prepare trays of warm, fragrant pastries, and greet each regular customer with the warmest smile she could manage. Few knew that behind her calm exterior, Clara understood hunger, cold, and the heavy loneliness of being forgotten by a world that never stopped moving. Until one chilly morning in early November, a small, unfamiliar figure appeared, carrying with her a story Clara would never forget. Who was this little girl? Why was she out there alone in the bitter cold? Let's find out together. The girl appeared just as Clara was wiping down the glass counter, her hands still dusted with the smell of flour and butter. No noise, no warning, just a small figure, almost blending into the doorway. She wore a faded denim jacket, the shoulders frayed, and a backpack so large it seemed to swallow her tiny frame whole. Her brown hair was tousled, her sneakers battered and worn as if they had crossed 100 dusty miles, but it was her eyes that stopped Clara cold. Big, bright, but weighed down. Like windows that had weathered too many storms, cracked slightly open just enough to let a sliver of hope escape. Clara smiled softly, the way she always did when meeting someone who carried more weight than words could explain. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said gently, pretending that this visit was just another part of her day. The girl didn't answer. She only nodded, the slightest, most cautious nod Clara had ever seen. Clara didn't know her name, yet not then, but the girl, later known to her as Lily, walked slowly into the bakery. She chose a small table by the window, sat down, and carefully placed her oversized backpack beside her, as if guarding a fragile world hidden inside. All morning, the little girl asked for nothing but a glass of water. She sat quietly, opening a tattered old book and disappearing into its pages. Every time someone entered the bakery, Lily's eyes flickered up, quick, guarded, scanning the door, before she ducked her head down again. Clara didn't ask questions. She had learned, from her own lonely days, that sometimes the kindest thing you can offer is patience and silence. The next day and the day after that, Lily came again, 7:20 IOM sharp, like a tiny, steadfast clock. Always just a glass of water, always the same worn-out book, always those quiet, watchful eyes. No one came with her, no parents, no siblings, only the thin winter wind brushing against the window and a little girl who seemed far too small for such a wide, unforgiving world. By the second Thursday, Clara stood behind the counter, as usual, quietly watching. Lily sat curled in her too thin jacket, her small hands trembling slightly as she clutched her book. The glass of water on her table had long gone cold, but today Clara noticed something different. Each time a customer at the next table ordered a toasted sandwich or a warm apple pie was carried past, Lily's eyes would flicker, just for a moment. A fleeting flash, like a tiny light squeezing through a crack, not greedy, not desperate, but hungry, and terrified that someone might notice. The kind of hunger Clara remembered too well, not just the gnawing in your stomach, the shame that settles into your very bones. Clara tightened her grip on her dish towel. She couldn't stand still another second. She reached for a golden croissant, fresh and buttery from the oven. Wrapping it carefully in a napkin, she muttered under her breath, loud enough for Lily to hear, "Extra from the oven? Can't let it go to waste." With a gentle smile, Clara placed the croissant on the girl's table. "Here if you want it, honey." Then she turned away quickly, pretending to busy herself with the coffee mugs. But out of the corner of her eye, she watched. Lily stared at the croissant as if it were a strange object from another world. Her small fingers hesitated, hovering, pulling back, then inching forward again. She darted a nervous glance around the bakery, ready to run if needed. But when her eyes met Clara's, when she saw nothing but a soft, steady smile waiting for her, Lily finally reached out. She picked up the croissant, broke off a small piece, and took a tentative bite. And for the first time, Clara saw it, the tiniest, most fragile crack of hope, breaking through the heavy walls around Lily's heart. Clara didn't wait for a reaction. She quickly turned back to the counter, pretending to busy herself wiping glasses. But out of the corner of her eye, she kept watching the small table by the window. Lily stared at the croissant like it was something strange and unfamiliar. Her small hands hovered above it, trembling, pulling back as if she feared someone might scold her. Her eyes darted around the bakery, nervous, tight, until they found Clara again, who simply smiled as if saying, "It's okay, sweetheart." Only then did Lily finally pick up the croissant, cautiously, delicately, a tiny nibble at first, then another, and another. Little by little, the tension in Lily's small face melted away. Her eyes softened, shifting from guarded to something much more fragile, like a tiny sprout finally drinking in the rain after a long, brutal drought. The next morning, Clara accidentally baked an extra blueberry muffin. The morning after that, a slice of warm banana bread. No invitation, no explanation, just simple plates of food, quietly placed down, with nothing attached except a silent promise that sometimes kindness needs no words at all. And from then on, each morning when Clara unlocked Maple and Thyme Bakery, she didn't just prepare pastries for her regulars. She always set aside something special for the little girl by the window. If you've ever known the feeling of being that hungry, like Lily once was, comment the word hungry below. But kindness, no matter how quietly offered, rarely goes unnoticed by the world. One chilly morning, near the end of the month, as Clara was placing a plate of cinnamon rolls in front of Lily like usual, she caught the low murmur of voices at the bar. "Look at that," a middle-aged man muttered, tone laced with mockery. "Giving away free pastries now?" Probably some distant relative. A woman sitting beside him chuckled. Nobody just gives things away like that for no reason. At first, it was just whispers, but soon, the comments grew louder, harder to ignore. "These days, you spoil kids and they just learn to expect handouts," another customer said at the register, shaking his head. "Nobody helps anybody without wanting something back," someone else added coldly, thudding a coffee cup onto the counter. Clara heard it all, but she only smiled politely, saying nothing. Life had already taught her a lesson. You don't always have to argue to defend kindness. Sometimes, the best way to protect it is simply to keep doing it anyway. But things didn't end there. Greg Hollis, the owner of the bakery, started to notice. One Monday morning, just as Clara was hanging up her apron, he called her over with a troubled look. "Clara, this whole giving away pastries thing, it's not good for business," he said, lowering his voice. "Some regulars are starting to complain." Clara tightened her hands inside her apron pockets. "I'll pay for it out of my tips," she said quietly but firmly. Greg frowned, hesitated, then let out a long sigh. "Just keep it under control. One pastry a morning, okay? No more." Clara nodded. It was a compromise she could live with. A small portion of her income, traded for the chance to lift that heavy hidden weight from Lily's small shoulders. To Clara, it was worth far more than any paycheck. Then, one icy winter morning, when the first sharp winds swept through Solvang's main street, Lily didn't show up. Clara stood behind the counter, wiping the same spotless spot on the glass, eyes flickering toward the door. 7:20, 7:30, 8 o'clock. The little table by the window stayed empty, the glass of water sitting cold and untouched. Still, Clara placed a warm croissant there just in case. Even as unease twisted quietly in her chest. "Probably found someplace else," Greg shrugged as he walked past. "No kid's gonna sit around a bakery drinking just water when it's this cold outside." Clara didn't answer. She simply tightened her arms around herself, trying to shove down the gnawing worry rising inside her. The next day, she set out another pastry, and the next, but the table remained empty. No notes, no messages, just a hollow space that seemed to seep into the very air of the bakery and into Clara's heart. And then, it got worse. Someone posted a photo online, a picture of the empty table, the untouched pastry, along with a mocking caption, "Solvang's newest charity case, feeding invisible friends with pastries." The comments underneath were even crueler. "Maybe next time pick a better cause. Keep feeding strays and they'll never learn. Nothing but a charity stunt gone wrong." Clara read every word with a heart that tightened painfully, not because of the mockery, but because of the cruelty behind it. No one knew who Lily was. No one knew the story hidden behind those quiet eyes. But still, they rushed to judge. That night, in her small apartment above the pharmacy, Clara sat in front of an old wooden box, the place where she kept a few precious items left of her father, Captain William Benson, who had given his life during a peacekeeping mission in the Middle East. Inside the box, tucked between faded medals and a worn photo of her father in uniform, Clara found a small, neatly folded letter. Its edges softened by time. Her father's handwriting was still strong, each line breathing the steady resilience of someone who had weathered countless storms. "Clara, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. There's a story I never told anyone. I want you to know it. Years ago, during a patrol deep in the desert, my unit and I found ourselves stranded in a small village, exhausted, starving, barely holding on. A local boy, skin and bones, approached us. He carried half a loaf of bread, the only food he had. I hesitated. In a war zone, you're taught to doubt everything. But when I looked into his eyes, I didn't see an enemy. I saw a human being. And so I accepted that half loaf from his trembling hands. In that moment, standing on opposite sides of conflict, we were no longer enemies. We were just two souls, sharing what little hope we had left. Clara, if you ever find yourself holding the last piece of bread, share it. Sharing doesn't make you weaker. It's refusing to share that makes us lose the best parts of ourselves." Clara set the letter down, her heart swelling with a deep, quiet ache. Her father, a man who had witnessed the worst of war, still believed that even half a loaf of bread, offered freely, could create a moment of peace where none seemed possible. She glanced back at the empty plate sitting on the table where Lily once sat, and she understood. Even if the whole town turned away, even if the gossip filled every corner of the internet, kindness still needed to be protected, not for recognition, not for reward, but simply because it was the right thing to do. If you believe even a crumb of kindness can keep humanity alive, comment the word peace below. The next morning, Clara arrived at the bakery earlier than usual. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned the key in the lock, but inside her chest, a quiet determination burned steady. Last night, under the soft golden light and the words of her father's old letter, she had made a promise to herself. No matter what. Whether Lily returned or not, whether the town understood or not, Clara would continue to do what was right. Because sometimes, as her father had written, fighting to protect kindness is its own kind of battle. Clara swept the floor, lit the ovens, and prepared the first trays of pastries with a tenderness that made her heart ache. And just like every morning, she placed a warm croissant at the small table by the window, the table that once belonged to Lily. Even though she knew the winter wind might be the only visitor today, even though she knew the glances and whispers might still linger, Clara smiled, because in her heart, that table had never been empty. Lily wasn't just a missing customer. She was a story unfinished, a quiet hope still searching for a place to belong. Some regulars watched Clara with puzzled or pitying eyes. Some shook their heads quietly. But this time, Clara didn't feel alone. She remembered Lily's eyes on that very first day, so cautious, so hungry, so full of fear. And she remembered how, little by little, those eyes had softened, not because of questions asked or favors demanded, but simply because someone had placed a pastry down each morning without expecting anything in return. Some battles aren't fought with banners or grand victories. Sometimes, the greatest win is helping a child believe that good people still exist. Clara quietly wiped her hands on her familiar navy blue apron. Outside, the cold wind still howled through Solvang's narrow streets, but inside the little bakery, warmth had already returned. 1 week passed since Clara had last seen Lily. The town of Solvang was bustling with preparations for the upcoming holiday season. Shops were stringing up lights. Wreaths hung across storefronts and lampposts in splashes of green and red. But for Clara, every morning still began the same way, by setting a small plate of pastries on the empty table by the window. And then, on a Tuesday morning, as the thin early winter sunlight just barely filtered through the bakery windows, something happened that Clara could never have expected. A deep, rumbling sound rolled down the street. Clara looked up, and her heart nearly stopped. 4 gleaming black SUVs, marked with military plates, rolled slowly into the parking lot outside Maple and Time Bakery. They moved with precision, like a practiced formation. Doors opened simultaneously, and uniformed soldiers stepped out from each vehicle. They didn't move with urgency. They didn't radiate threat. They stood tall and still, faces solemn but eyes filled with something deeper. Gratitude, respect. Leading them was a woman in full military dress, a colonel, her hair cut short and silver, gray, her gaze sharp yet steady. Inside the bakery, everything fell silent. The regular customers paused, forks mid-air, coffee cups frozen halfway to their lips. Even Greg poked his head out from the kitchen, confused, wiping his hands on his apron. The colonel stepped straight to the counter, standing at attention before Clara, who was still gripping her dish towel, stunned. The colonel removed her gloves, her voice warm but steady. "Are you Clara Benson?" Clara swallowed, her hands trembling slightly as she nodded. "Yes, I am." The colonel smiled gently and pulled out a white envelope, embossed with the seal of the United States Department of Defense. "The Special Operations Command extends its deepest gratitude to you," she said. "And I also have a personal message from the father of a young girl named Lily Parker." The air in the bakery froze. Clara stood rooted to the spot. The name echoed in her mind like a whisper from a distant memory. Lily, the little girl with the battered backpack and the heavy, watchful eyes. Clara accepted the envelope, her fingers shaking as she unfolded it. Inside was a handwritten letter, the paper worn soft at the corners. the steady, simple penmanship of a man who had weathered too many storms. The colonel stood tall and began to read aloud, her voice filling the silent bakery. To the one who showed kindness to my daughter. If you are reading this letter, it means I did not make it home. I will not be there to walk Lily to school or to watch her grow into the young woman I know she will become. But I know this. Somewhere along the way, there was someone who stepped in, not with grand gestures, but with small, simple acts. A plate of pastries, a glass of water, a smile that asked no questions and gave no pity. You did not know where she came from, you did not demand her story, yet you made her feel seen, you made her feel understood, you nourished more than her body during those hard days, you kept her dignity alive. You kept her faith in a world that can be so terribly cold. From the bottom of a father's heart, I thank you. You didn't just feed my daughter, you fed her hope, and for me, that is no less sacred than life itself. The colonel's voice softened and faded. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft, ticking clock above the counter. Clara clutched the letter against her chest, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. All the little things she had done, the accidental extra pastries, the silent glances, the warm smiles without questions, they hadn't been meaningless. They had been everything. She had done the most important thing of all. She had kept the fragile belief alive in a child's heart, the belief that kindness still existed, even in a world growing colder every day. Inside the Maple and Thyme bakery, no one moved, no one spoke. The moment hung heavy and sacred in the warm, golden air. When Colonel Grace Whitmore finished reading the letter, she straightened her posture and raised her hand in a formal salute. A salute reserved only for those who earned the highest respect. And today it was for a simple bakery worker wearing a faded navy apron. Immediately, every soldier behind her followed suit, saluting in unison. The gesture rippled outward. Customers stood up, placing their hands over their hearts. Even Greg, the bakery owner who had once hesitated, removed his hat and bowed his head. No speeches, no clapping, no fanfare, only a deep, sacred silence, and a profound, quiet gratitude that filled the room. Clara stood frozen at the counter, clutching the letter against her chest, tears blurring her vision. She had never imagined that her small acts of kindness, the extra pastries, the quiet glances, the silent smiles, could touch so many hearts. The colonel stepped forward, placing something small and heavy into Clara's hand, a challenge coin, engraved with the emblem of the Special Operations Forces and the words, "For service beyond duty." The colonel said nothing more. She simply squeezed Clara's hand, a wordless thank you, heavier than any spoken phrase. As the military convoy quietly pulled away down the street, Clara remained standing by the bakery's front window, her heart full, aching, overflowing. That day, the little bakery on the corner of Solvang didn't just bake bread and pastries. It baked hope. It kept the warmth of kindness alive, the belief that even a small act can light a way for a soul lost in darkness. At the small table by the window, Clara placed another plate the next morning, not for Lily anymore, but for anyone who might need a place to remember that good people still exist. Time passed, but the memory of that morning never faded from Solvang. The story of the woman with the apron and the extra pastries traveled far beyond the town's borders. Soldiers told it at distant bases. Military families, children growing up missing a parent, found comfort in it, in knowing that somewhere there were still people like Clara, quietly keeping hope alive. Greg himself hung a small wooden plaque above Lily's old table. Carved into it were simple words. Here, no one is forgotten. Maple and Thyme Bakery became a haven for anyone who needed a pastry, a glass of water, and a small reminder that kindness still had a place in this world. And as for Lily Parker, the little girl who once sat quietly by the window with a backpack bigger than she was, she now had a new home. Billy lived with her grandparents on the outskirts of Colorado, where the fields stretched wide and colorful kites danced in the afternoon sky. She went to school regularly, joined the book club, and every morning she still slung that old, battered backpack over her shoulder. But her eyes no longer carried the same sorrow. In a letter she sent Clara months later, Lily wrote, "I still think about the bakery, and I still believe that somewhere out there are people like you, people who set down a plate of food without needing to ask why." Lily's life would never be perfect, but now she knew she wasn't alone on her journey. And sometimes, knowing that someone once believed you were worth a simple plate of food, that's enough to help a child walk forward, stronger than ever. As for Clara, she was still there. Still rising before dawn, lighting the ovens, kneading the dough, still baking pastries that smelled of butter, sugar, and something warmer. Hope. But now, every pastry carried something more, a quiet reminder tucked inside the layers. Kindness doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need headlines. It doesn't even need to be repaid. It just needs to exist. It just needs to be given. Like a small fire against the coldest nights. In today's noisy, fast-moving world, that lesson is more precious than ever. Because among all the hustle, competition, and noise, it's often the silent gestures. A plate quietly set down, a smile that asks for nothing, that remind us we are still human. So if you ever see someone quietly needing a crumb of kindness, don't hesitate. You may not change the whole world, but you might just change their world. If you believe that kindness is always the right choice, comment the word kindness below. And if you believe stories of compassion, sacrifice, and hope deserve to be shared, please subscribe to NT Amazing Stories. Together, we'll keep these small but mighty lights burning, one story, one quiet act of goodness at a time, just like Clara once did.